were gone, they packed up and left the cabin. Not being able to carry all their gear, they left behind over $200 of equipment. As they passed down the trail, they saw one of the creatures 80 yards away. Beck fired his rifle, this time getting a hit, and the creature collapsed, falling over the edge of the canyon. When they got to Spirit Lake, they reported the events to the local rangers, and the story came to the attention of reporters who flocked to the area and went to the cabin. Days had passed, but the evidence of the encounter was still there. Rocks and giant footprints surrounded the cabin. Fred Beck would speculate many years later that he had felt that these creatures were guardian spirits of the wilderness and that they were supernatural beings that came from another dimension. The Native American Indians that lived near Mount St. Helens had mentioned that these creatures lived on the mountain and that they were man stealers and they would take people in the night. There are two accounts where this type of behavior is reported. The first comes from Albert Ostman. Ostman's encounter happened in the summer of 1924. While working in British Columbia in Canada, he decided to take a break to go gold prospecting in the mountains near Toba Inlet. Ostman noticed one night that his camp had been disturbed. He attributed it to animals looking for food. He put his rifle in his sleeping bag just in case any large animals would come looking again for food. Because of the warm weather, he was not sleeping in a tent, he was just using his sleeping bag. Later that night he was woken up when he felt himself being pushed down into his sleeping bag. He felt the bag being picked up and thrown over something. He assumed he was being taken by bandits. He noticed that the movement of what was carrying him didn't seem like a horse, but more like a man. He also could feel his bag of supplies bumping into him. Osman could feel that they were going up and down steep hills. At times he would be dragged along the ground, then carried again. After around 3 hours the trip ended, and Osman could hear what sounded like chattering and grunting. As dawn came up, Osman was able to see what had taken him, a large, hairy, ape-like man. He also saw three other similar creatures, one large female and two smaller, probably juvenile creatures, one male and one female. Looking around, he noticed he was in a small area of about 7 acres surrounded by sheer rocks, with only one apparent way to get in and out, which was being guarded by the large male Bigfoot creature. Osman explored the area and found water and set up camp, while cautiously looking for a way out. At first, the juvenile creatures stayed away from him, but at the end of the first day they seemed interested in Osman, and Osman tossed an empty snuff can to the young male creature. He quickly learned how to open it and closed the box. He went and showed the box to the younger female creature, and they went and showed the large male, and they started chatting with him. They generally ignored Osman except when he would try to leave. The large male would block his way and glare at him. They would leave him roots and leaves to eat. Osman had his rifle, but he only had 6 shots, and he wasn't sure he could kill all of the aggressive creatures with so few bullets. So he decided to bide his time and wait. He camped with them for several days. The time gave him a chance to observe the creatures and their habits. The two larger creatures were over 7 feet tall, and the adolescents were around 6 feet tall. They had huge barrel chests. Osman guessed that the weight of the creatures had to be over 600 pounds. They had flat-faced heads, which seemed small in comparison to their bodies. They had no noticeable neck, not unlike a gorilla. They had long muscular arms, longer proportionately than humans. Their hands were large, while with short stubby fingers. They had fingernails like chisels, and the feet were massive in size, and the soles were heavily padded. The creatures seemed to be active day and night. They slept on sheets of woven bark and moss. Each day one or two of the creatures would leave and return with grass roots and leaves. After several days Osman got a campfire going and made some coffee. The two male creatures came and sat down about 10 feet from him. They watched him drink and eat. After he was done, Osman opened up a new can of snuff and took a pinch. The large male creature took the can of snuff and ate the entire contents. He then began to squeal and claw at his tongue. He rolled over and leapt for the spring that was near there. The other creatures followed him, seeing his opportunity to leave, and fearful that the large male creature in anger might hurt him. He grabbed his rifle and supplies and started running for the exit. Hearing footsteps, he looked behind and saw the older female coming at him. He pulled out his rifle and shot around over her head. The creature stopped and ran in the other direction. Osman ran out of the valley and went on a mile before checking to see if he was being followed. There was no sign of pursuit, but Osman continued on, taking no chances. He walked back to civilization for 2 days straight, until he found a group of lumberjacks who fed him before taking him to the base camp where he was able to get back to Vancouver. Osman would tell close friends about his experience, but didn't go public with the information until 1958, when he felt that he could tell his story without fear of ridicule. In 1928, a fur trapper from the Notuka Indian tribe had a similar encounter with a large hairy ape man. Mullichet Harry left his Vancouver Island home to go on a fur trapping expedition. Paddling in his canoe, he headed for the Conuma River at the head of the Klupana Inlet. He set camp 12 miles inland from the river. One night, he awoke to the sensation of being picked up. Being fall, he was wrapped up in his blankets, and he found himself being thrown over the shoulder of a giant hairy man-like ape. Mullichet Harry had grown up hearing stories about Bigfoot and needed no convincing as to what had picked him up and was carrying him away. He tried to get free, but the creature's grip was too strong. He estimated that he was carried for about 3 miles before he was put down beside a steep hill with a large overhang. Looking around, he saw himself surrounded by 20 Bigfoot creatures. There was a mixture of males and females and young adolescents. The males seemed to be pushing the females and adolescents away from him. Mullichet then noticed a pile of gnawed bones on the ground. He figured that if they were going to eat him, he didn't have long to live. To his relief, the creatures were more interested in the underwear he was wearing than eating him. They would pull at it, probably thinking it some sort of extra skin. After a while, they left the females and young get closer to him. When daylight came, the majority of the adults left. 2 adult females stayed with the young. Around 1 p.m., the 2 females went to sleep. Mullichet took his opportunity and ran away. He ran until he found a river and then followed it downstream 15 miles, going as fast as he could. He found his canoe, jumped in, and frantically paddled home. He arrived at 3 a.m., suffering from exposure, terrified and babbling. His family sent for the local missionary, Father Anthony, to help nurse him back to health. Mullichet Harry was confined to bed and didn't leave his house for 3 weeks. During this time, he told the missionary his story, which Father Anthony wrote down. Mullichet Harry never went back to the Conuma River to collect his rifle and equipment, nor did he go into the forest alone again. In the summer of 1941, outside of Ruby Creek, near Agassiz in British Columbia, we have the account of the Chapmans, a family living in a small shack in the woods. George Chapman worked on the railways and would often be away for several days at a time. Jenny Chapman, with their 3 children, would tend to the crops of fruits and vegetables around the house. One afternoon, when George Chapman was away, the oldest boy, who was 9 years old, went to his mother and told her that he saw a cow-looking animal coming down from the forested hill near their house. The child seemed upset, so the mother went to investigate. Miss Chapman saw the head and shoulders of what she thought was a bear moving through the underbrush. She called her other 2 children to come to her, and when the creature stepped out of the underbrush, Jenny Chapman instantly knew that the creature wasn't a bear. She saw a human-looking, long-armed, hairy ape man with broad shoulders and a large chest. It was standing by a fence post, and Miss Chapman was able to determine its approximate size at 7 foot 6 inches tall. The creature looked around and then seemed to notice Miss Chapman and her children. It threw its head back and started gurgling and whistling some type of call and started coming towards the cabin. Worried, Miss Chapman sent her oldest son into the cabin to get a blanket, which she used to cover her 2 younger children as they went away from the cabin. She did this thinking that the creature would go into the cabin looking for the children that he had saw go in, and that would give them some extra time to get away once they got out of sight of the creature. They ran downstream to the village, and they went to Mrs. Chapman's father's house. 2 hours later, George Chapman came home from work. He noticed the front door left open, and the outhouse was smashed. He also found giant footprints in parts of the ground nearby. George Chapman called for his family and received no response.